When the men got up to leave, they looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham walked among them to see them on their way, or along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him."
Okay, real quickly, this is reaffirming what has already been promised to Abraham, is that he will be a great and mighty nation. And so this is just the Lord. Obviously, this is Moses sending this to us, but Moses received it in this form, is that the Lord is speaking. This is surely going to happen. So it's kind of like a reassurance for us to read this again and again in the in the Old Testament, that these promises are not just said one time and we just wait in anticipation for them. They're often repeated in one way or another as reminders to us as we're reading the Bible. It's just kind of an interesting way. That didn't have to be in there, in other words, but it's in there for our benefit. So, the 3 men, it says, rose. Well, obviously, one of them is the angel of the Lord. And in verse 19:1, we're going to see that the other two are actually angels. So the term men is applied to them, but they're actually angelic beings. It says they're heading down toward, the men rose from there and looked toward Sodom. So that's kind of a little... You wonder, why did it say that? We all know, because we all know the story. But if you read words that you haven't come to before and you say, I wonder why it says Sodom. You know, there's never anything in there that isn't in there for a reason, in other words. So if you're reading a passage in the Bible that you've never read, and I'm not saying that anybody here hasn't read the whole Bible, but if you haven't and you are reading a passage, you can kind of anticipate things by the way it's written. But we don't do that. We read it more as a story. Now, oh, I wonder what's going to happen. Well, we know something is going to happen. Sometimes in a story you read something that's never mentioned again. But in the Bible, if it mentions, it's probably going to come again. So I'm just giving you things to think about as you're reading the Bible. Anyway, go ahead.
For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Okay, now, that was an unconditional blessing. Right? Unconditional promise, the covenant that he made. All right. But it does say here that he is, I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord. So this is something that it's incumbent on Abraham, even though this is an unconditional promise that nations will be blessed through him, that Abraham is responsible for making sure that this comes about in a limited way. In other words, you know, well, our own children, you know, we need to raise them up in the way of the Lord. Salvation is not passed on to our children. They have to make the decision on their own. And so, you know, in order to keep this going, God is going to remind the Israelites throughout the year. Hi, Lil. But you do see that. It says here, to keep the way of the Lord, to do justice and righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. So, although it's not something that God made an unconditional promise, but the unconditional promise, we can assume, is going to be worked out because of faithfulness. All right? Now, they were faithless, and we know that throughout the Bible, all the way to the second exile. But God is ever faithful. But you see that it's incumbent on us to make sure that we pass on the things of the next generation. Just like America. Whether America is going to be blessed in and after the tribulation or not, we don't know. But if it is, it's because we are humbling ourselves and returning to the God that we called on originally as a nation. Anyway, I hope what I just said makes sense to you, because you kind of read that in verse 19 there. Okay, go ahead. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin so grievous that I will go down and see if I will see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. Okay, question. Does the Lord already know?
Yes.
Okay, so this is written for our benefit, and it's said for the benefit of Abraham. Okay, he already knows what's going to happen. That's right. And once again, I've said this, and maybe not in this class, but in other classes, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great. All right, sin, I don't quite understand this, but the Bible does bear this out. Sin heaps up. Okay, to a point where God destroys nations or destroys peoples.
It's not like this one sin is going to bring about the destruction of a nation. And we know that because God said to Abraham back a little while ago, the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its fulfillment. And so 400 years from now, you will be brought back into the land. God knew that the sin would be heaped up to the point where judgment would be needed. And this is the same thing. When they rebel against God, eventually he disperses his people. And what does it say? When the people are dispersed to Babylon, the land rested while the people were out of the land. It received its Sabbath rest that it didn't receive while the people were in the land. So sin is heaped up, and then the rest of the land needs to be brought about. And so, like I say, I don't quite understand this, why this is, but there's something in the nature of God and the way that he deals with the earth that he's created. And it's, in other words, it's not just dealing with the people, but how the people work within the earth. And I don't want to get any deeper in that without starting to sound metaphysical or something, but the sin of Sodom is great. These sins have been heaping up, in other words. You see that? Okay. It's a corporate thing. That's right. And so, good point. Who is it that brings about, I want to make sure I get my wording right so I don't confuse you. Who is it that ends up bringing about the judgment on a particular people? The people do, but who is it that...
Leaders.
The leaders. Without fail, that's what the book of Kings and the book of Chronicles is telling us, is that when this king humbles himself, the land is healed because the people follow suit. And when the king apostatizes, if I said that word right, then the people tend to do that as well. And so that's right. The leaders, we elect the leaders in this nation that we are under. Now, Israel didn't. They had a line of succession, good king, bad king, and the people turned away. But we are responsible in this nation for the direction of this nation as a people. And so when we get a bad president and bad Supreme Court justices, all we're doing is we're bringing it bad on ourselves. It's just as obvious as it could be from the Bible. And so, the king of Sodom is more culpable, or I guess is the word, than the people, because he's the one that could put an end to it. He could establish justice. He could establish righteousness, but he doesn't. He allows all this wickedness to go on, and then it just gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. And we see that right here, right here. You get a decent president, and the morals kind of turn back. People start going to churches again, and then we get a president that doesn't feel so great about morality, and the whole nation swings away. The whole nation. That's not everybody in the nation, but the nation as a whole. So it's something that's important, and it goes all the way back to the beginnings of the Bible. Genesis, beginnings, okay? So that's... all right, go ahead. 22?
Yeah, if that reach me, if not, I will know. The men turned away and went toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked?"
What is another book in the Bible that deals with that kind of concept? Mike did a great sermon on it, Mike Riley. The book of Habakkuk.
Jeremiah one.
Well, Jeremiah does too. I was thinking more of Habakkuk, where Habakkuk the prophet is saying, why is a nation more unrighteous than us allowed to come in and judge us? And so, this is what Abraham here is saying, is that would you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And well, we'll go through these, and then we'll talk about what I'm thinking here. Go ahead.
What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? The Lord said, "If I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake."
Okay, real quickly, that is a title that I would give to the Lord, the judge of all the earth. Okay, when you're reading the Bible, sometimes you'll see a phrase, and that to me seems like an appropriate title. So if you're giving a sermon or you're talking to somebody else, you can use that as a title that's actually right from the Bible, judge of all the earth. Now, he's asked about the 50 people. Go on, and unless something pops into me, we'll just finish up through chapter 18, and we'll talk about it.
Then Abraham spoke up again. Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, What if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city because of 5 people? If I find 45 there, he said, I will not destroy it. Once again, he spoke to him. What if only 40 are found there? He said, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found there? He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. Abraham said, now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 can be found there? He said, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if only 10 can be found there? He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home.
Okay, does anybody know what this particular verse, then the Lord said, suppose 10 should be found there, and he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. Does anybody know what significance that has in Jewish society?
Like the leader. Didn't they have leaders of 10 or?
Well, no, they did have divisions under the Mosaic Law, but that's not what that's pertaining to.
10 was the Hebrew worship praying, 10 men gathered.
That's right, and you'll see that. Here's an example. When I flew to Israel, a bunch of Jewish guys wanted to get together and pray, and they could not pray until they had, I believe the word is a minya, where they have to have 10 people in order to have a prayer meeting in the presence of the Lord. And so they finally got 10 guys, and they all stood in the back of the airplane and had their little prayers, right? But that is where they get this, is that they are 10 righteous people. Now that's making the assumption that they're righteous in and of themselves, which really bothers me that they do that, because you see what I'm saying, but that is something that the Jewish people will do. When they have 10 people gathered together, that is an acceptable, like, synagogue all by itself or whatever. But like I said, that's assuming that they are righteous, and righteousness does not come from us, it comes from the Lord. But anyway,
two or more.
2 or 3 are gathered. And if you look at this particular thing, if you think of Jesus standing there talking to the apostles, wouldn't this be what you would expect to, the same? That's why I say I believe that this is Jesus standing there. You know, people say the pre-incarnate Christ or the eternal Christ or whatever. This is him standing there. However he got there from the state of, you know, being incarnate in the year 4000 back to here, whether it was before he was incarnate or, in other words, some people will disagree with me, but I believe that the Jesus that we see standing there at Gilgal when Joshua shows up, or standing here with Abraham, or throughout the Old Testament, is the Jesus that was there in the middle of human history at the year 4000. He ascended to the Father, and he is, I don't want to get anybody thinking anything crazy here, but to me the term pre-incarnate is a contradiction in terms. In other words, how can you be incarnate before you're incarnate? Right? Either he is a man or he's not a man. Either he's God that hasn't yet become a man, or he went into Mary, became a man. And somehow, in my thinking, and I've never solidified this, but I can't get beyond it in my own head, is that the Lord that presented himself to the world from Mary and eventually became, you know, our Savior, was crucified, was resurrected, is the same Lord that is doing all these things in human history. He ascended to the Father, he is at the right hand of the Father, and he is outside of time, space, and matter as we know it, and he is able to do these things. He is everywhere at once.
He's in eternity.
He is in eternity. Now, I know that may sound insane, but somehow he became flesh and dwelt among us, and from that point, he's there. And he's there, and he's there, and we see him throughout the Bible. I don't want to say that's doctrine, so please, this is just me thinking out loud, and I've said it before, and other people said you're insane, but whatever. But that's just how I see it, because when people say the pre-incarnate Christ, it just doesn't make any sense to me. He is the eternal Christ, okay? And he became the eternal Christ. He's always been God, fully God, but he became God and man when the Holy Spirit united with Mary at that time. So I don't know how it works, and like I said, I've never solidified that in my head, but it's just how I see it, is that when you see him interacting with people, you know, whether it's Samson's father, Manoah, or it's Joshua at Gilgal, or wherever you see the angel of the Lord in man form, you can almost read it
like you're reading the gospel account. I mean, and he's tenderly dealing with Abraham here. Somehow Abraham knew that it was him. Somehow, he knew that this was the angel of the Lord.